So let's go ahead and get started. Today, our topics include processing applications, how to manage allocations, and how to print and handle Angel tags. So what we're focusing on here is definitely anything new. So if you're a returning user, you want to make sure to pay attention because there are some new features kind of in each of those categories. And then we'll also point out some tips and tricks for those people who are returning or even people who are new this year to make sure that you don't fall into any traps and you know what you're doing. There are more in-depth training videos on that YouTube channel. So if this is your very first time, you'll get to see the tips and tricks here at the higher level overview, but you might want to take a step back and go watch those videos as well to get the full in-depth training. The first thing that we're going to talk about is processing applications. So far, in our first webinar, we covered setting up your campaign and how to open your online registrations, how to do in-person applications. And now we want to talk about, okay, what happens when those applications start coming in and how do we start processing those? What are the different statuses that they go through, and how do we get those applications all the way to an actual angel that then we can do something with, an angel that we can get adopted and so on. So first things first, by now you should know how the applications actually get into the system. We covered how to configure that on our last webinar, but just as a very, very quick refresher, all of your online applicants, especially, so if we're talking about online applicants, they will all go to saangeltree.org to enter their application. So no matter where you are, no matter what corps you're from, what division you're from, what territory you're from, all of your applicants will start at the same place. That's saangeltree.org. So they'll come here, and the first thing it asks them to do is either put in the invitation code. We talked about invitation codes on our last webinar. You can definitely go back and watch that if you missed it. But if they have an invitation code, they're welcome to use that. Otherwise, they just put in their zip code. I'm going to fly really quickly through this application. Feel free to, at your own leisure, go through this with your campaign setup, because it's going to look different for everybody because your campaign configurations will be different. It'll look a little bit different for everyone, so you want to make sure to take the time before you launch your campaign to go through this a couple times, make sure you understand what your applicants are seeing. But this is just to give you a really quick overview. Let's see, and I'll fill this out as fast as I can. Remembering that this form will look a little bit different depending on your campaign settings. So not every field that's here, but there are a couple of new things that I wanted to point out. There are a couple of new fields. These are specifically if your territory takes the data from AngelTree and pushes it over into any other social service kind of data warehouse. A lot of times these are data fields that you need to collect on your applicants to be able to translate that data over. So we've added a few of those. Again, they're optional in the sense that for your campaign, you can choose to not include them, but they're there now so that if you do want to collect this information for your applicants, you can configure that back in your campaign settings. So those would include things like race, household type. Some of these are the new fields that we're looking at. I'm going to go ahead and enter my email address. We added another field to confirm your email address. Last year we got some feedback that people had just kind of mistyped their email addresses and therefore didn't have a valid one in the system, so it was hard to communicate with them. So in order to help with that, we put in another field to confirm their email address so that they accidentally mistype it once. We hope to catch them on the second one, make sure they're giving us a good email address. Another optional field that we've added here, optional in the sense that you can configure if you want to use it or not. You can require it, but that's the county. Sometimes you like to do statistical reporting by counties. That's something you might want to collect. So based on the zip code that the person entered, it will, we do a lookup to see what counties that zip code could fall under, and give them a list of those here. In this case, my zip code 75001 is completely in Dallas County. So it just gives me the one option. If somebody has a zip code that falls, crosses county lines, it will give them the option to choose which of those counties they're in. Okay, so that helps you be able to do that reporting by county later. Another piece that's important for this year, you may not have cared too much in the past if you had a phone number for these people, but now and something we'll talk about during this webinar is a new way to communicate with them, potentially via text message. So if you think you might use that, you want to make sure that you are collecting the phone number on your application. So if you're not yet, you might want to go to your campaign settings and make phone number a required field, or at least an optional one, to make sure that you're getting as many phone numbers as you can if you think you might need to use the text communication option, which we'll talk about shortly. So I'm going to click next. And one thing I want to point out is at the point where the person has completed that first step, once we know who the applicant is and we've collected their email address, that now gives us the ability to be able to communicate back with that person. So what happened is I actually received an email that is, as the applicant, I received an email that says, Angelica Robertson, thank you for starting your application. If you get lost for any reason, this is how you can get back to your application. So one of the things that was happening to some people last year is the applicant would kind of lose their place, get lost, and not know how to get back to their application. So they would just start a new one. So to try and avoid that this year, and this was actually implemented at some point last year, but just want to make sure everybody's aware of it. Every applicant gets emailed as long as they have completed that first step of the application, right? So as long as we know who they are and what their email address is, we send them a link so that they can click that link and get back to their application to complete it at any time, okay? So that's an important thing you want to be aware of. And hopefully that cuts down on some of the questions and the kind of half-entered draft applications that you would sometimes get. So now I'm just going to quickly enter my angel information. And as we talked about on our last webinar, there is a new field, a new optional field for the gift wish being a drop-down list. So depending on the settings, hold on a little bit, depending on the settings in your campaign and the age ranges and the gift options that you provided, that's what we'll be showing in this list here. So you can see that for this age bracket, we've given them two options: strollers, learning toys, and of course that drop-down list can be anything you want it to be. That's where you configure that in your campaign settings. So if you haven't done that yet and you want to use this gift wish list drop down, make sure you go back and look at our last webinar, and it'll tell you how to go in and add those values and customize those values for your campaign. So I'll skip all the rest of this just for the sake of getting through this a little more quickly. All right, so the disclaimer information here, this may update from time to time, but the disclaimer is there. The applicant can read that and then apply their signature. So I happen to be using a laptop. If they're using a touchscreen device, a mobile phone, a tablet, they can sign with their finger. It's really simple, but that gives us an easy way to, so here I am kind of signing with my finger. That gives us a way to quickly collect their consent. And then the last step here is to provide any documentation that's required for this campaign. Again, this is the type of documentation that's required and for whom is something you configure under your campaign settings. And this is something we did on our last webinar. So if you want to go check that back out, you can. But this is where the applicant actually has the opportunity to upload those documents. If you hear, if you're working on troubleshooting, a quick tip, if somebody says they're having trouble uploading, one common mistake might be that I will select the file, but not actually hit the upload button. Sometimes they think they've uploaded it just by selecting it, but you want to make sure to click upload until it appears down below. So that might be just a quick kind of troubleshooting tip as you're helping your applicants through that. And then I'm going to confirm my documentation's all listed here. And again, the type of documentation that I'm not spending a lot of time on this because we kind of covered this on our last webinar, but the type of documentation that is required and who it's required for, that's all something you configure for your own campaign. So we happen to have birth certificate and SNAP number here, but those are, that's just for this campaign, what happens to be configured. You can set your own in your campaign settings. So make sure you go take a look at that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and submit this application because what we really want to talk about today is how do I now process this application? What happens once it gets submitted? So I'm going to jump back over here into TSAM. So your AngelTree administrators and or intake supervisors or processors, anyone you have given the task this season of processing applications, this is kind of what they need to know and all the steps they need to take. So I'm going to come here under applicants. I'm going to go under applicant records. And there are some changes here. So if you're a returning user, pay really close attention here because there are some changes that will be really beneficial to you that I want to make sure that we're aware of. One thing to note, which is different than last year, is by default, when I come into this screen, I am not going to see any draft applications for online applicants. Now I can see this draft application because this was entered by an interviewer inside of TSAM, so that was an in-person or an in-person interview style application. But all of your online applications, you won't see them on this list if they're still in draft status. Reason being, you have a lot of people filling out draft applications at any given time, and it can get overwhelming and a little confusing to see all of the drafts listed here. So we heard a lot of feedback that said, hey, it's great that we can see the draft applications, but I really don't want to see them all the time. I don't need them in my face. So by default, you won't see those here. However, if someone calls you up and says, I'm trying to fill out this application and it's still in draft and you're looking for it, you can find online draft applications by dropping down the filter and clicking this checkbox here that says include online draft applications. And then if you refresh, that will bring up any online applications that are still in that draft mode. So you can still find them if you want to pull those up. You can still get to them, but just know an important change that by default, they're not going to show here until they actually get submitted. So draft means that someone has started the application, but hasn't gotten all the way to that last step of submitting it. Okay? So that's draft applications. Hopefully you don't have to bother with those, but just know that if you need to, you can use that filter to have those show up. So I'm going to remove my filters that I just added. So now we're just back to our kind of working applications. These are applications that either were submitted from online that are ready for us to review, or ones that we're entering in person, doing an in-person interview style. So when applications get submitted from the public, from online, they go to a status of pending. So you can see in the status column in the far right, we have a bunch of applications that are pending. One tip is that as you're working on these, you can use that filter to filter by the status of pending. And that way you're kind of only looking at the ones that you are ready to work on, if that makes sense. All right, so I've got my list of pending applications, and you may even use that filter to say, okay, I only want to work on the pending applications from this particular intake site. So you can combine those filters to say, okay, these are the Irving Corps pending applications for today, and these are the ones you'll work on. Another quick, oh, excuse me, nope, already covered that. Okay, so I'm gonna remove that filter just so we have some more to work with. So now I have my pending applications and I want to go ahead and process these. So I'm gonna open the one we just did for Angelica Robertson here. Of course, I'm gonna open it by clicking on the link. And now we need to process this. So question is, what does process this mean? And there are a few new options here. So this is where I want especially returning users to pay close attention because there are some differences here. When an application is submitted, you have several options. First of all, you might look at this and for whatever reason know that this person does not qualify, this person cannot be included in the program. For whatever reason you determine, for whatever threshold, income threshold, or whatever it is, you do have the option to decline. So I can go here and I can click the decline button, and it tells me, please provide a reason for the decline of the application. The system will notify the applicant via email that the application has been declined, and your reason for declining will be included. So here is where you would want to say something like, unfortunately, we've reached our max and we can't accept anymore, so we're going to have to decline, or unfortunately, you don't qualify for whatever reason. You would put that information here, and when I confirm the decline, the system will automatically notify that person via email to say, unfortunately, your application's been declined, and here's why, and it will give that reason. So that's a new thing. So your application, if you do that, the application status is updated to declined. So you can tell, okay, we've already processed that one and we declined it. Instead of deleting it or doing something like that, where you lose the history, this gives you the ability to decline it and update the status to decline, so you can tell later on who has been declined. Another option, if I receive this, I might receive this and notice that the documentation's all wrong, or they forgot to include some information, or whatever the reason is, I might want to return this to the applicant. So there's a button here that says return to applicant. I also have the ability to include a custom notification to this applicant. So if I check the box here, this is where I might say something like, if they, something like that, right? So they've uploaded their documentation, but it's not quite right for whatever reason. You can choose to include this message to them. So I'm going to go ahead and submit. What that does is it updates the status to returned to applicant. So that's important and a change from last year, because when I come here to look at my applicant, instead of it just remaining in a status of pending or going back to a status of draft, now it actually comes with a status of return to applicant, so that I can tell I have processed this one, or I have touched it at the very least, and it went to a status of return to applicant. So the applicant receives the email. So here's what the email looks like. They received this email that says, we're processing it, but it's been reopened for editing. And here's your message. You forgot to attach whatever. And they have a link that takes them back to their application where they can go and make those changes and resubmit it. Okay, so that gives you a really easy way to not only return it back to them, but to know which ones have been returned back and which ones are ready for processing versus which ones have been returned and you're waiting on the information back. So that helps you kind of segregate those. Once they make those changes and they submit it back to you, it will now have a status of pending. So now you'll pick it up in the next time you go to process pending applications, you'll pick that one back up and be able to process it. So I'm going to go back in here. So this is the same application. Notice it's still in a status of return to applicant. Sometimes what will happen is they'll say, oh, I just couldn't figure it out or whatever, and they just stop by the office and hand you a copy of their documentation. If that were to happen and you need to move this application forward without them resubmitting it, you can go ahead and submit it on their behalf, even though it's in a status of return to applicant. So when applications come in, they're pending. I have two options initially, well, three options initially: to decline outright, to return it to the applicant and wait for their input back, or I can actually go ahead and process this further. Then the third option would be to submit it, to actually go ahead and submit this into our pipeline. So it tells me right here if I have the submit button is grayed out. We get this question often, why can't I submit here? It describes to you there that the angel requires a distribution appointment, or the family, excuse me, requires a distribution appointment before you are able to submit. So it's going to be grayed out until that, as the intake reviewer, I'm the one who's reviewing this application, right? So I see all of the angel information, I see all of the details, and then I say, okay, yes, I do want to go ahead and schedule this pickup. So I'm going to click here to get to my distribution schedule. Again, this is something we talked about at our last webinar, so creating your distribution schedule. This step requires that you have already done that. So if you haven't set your distribution schedule yet, and you want more info about that, you can go back and watch our last webinar, and there are also some training videos out there about your campaign setup that would help you know how to do this. But this step does require that you have already set up your distribution schedule. So because I have done that, I have open distribution appointments available here. So I'm going to click which of these time slots I want to give this family. Going to schedule that. And now that this family has a distribution appointment, they've also been assigned a family code that is unique to this campaign. So family code, in this case, DFW 100. Again, those codes are driven by your campaign setup. So if you haven't done that yet, you can learn more about that there. But so now that we have received a code and an appointment, now I actually am able to submit this application. So here the submit button is not grayed out anymore. Now I can actually click it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now this application has a status of submitted. So if we're following the chain of these statuses, it's important to understand what the different statuses mean. As you process these things, you need to know what each of them mean. So we went from draft status, which means the applicant has started the application but hasn't finished it yet. That's a draft. Once they are done with their application and do that final submit button on their online application, then it goes to a status of pending. So pending means that it has come to us, but we haven't reviewed it yet. It's not official. Then someone reviews it. And once you're ready and you have assigned the distribution appointment, you can submit it. And submitted means, okay, this application has been reviewed. It's official. This is part of our program. This application is moving forward. This is submitted. So those are the statuses we've gone through so far: draft, pending, and submitted. And then decline and return to applicant only if you need to. Okay. So now that this is submitted, there's kind of one step left in order to get the angels from this family moved over so that we can actually start working with them. We can start allocating them, we can start printing their tags, we can start doing all of those things. The last thing that this needs is a supervisor approval or an admin approval. So I'll talk about those really quickly because we do get some questions about that. It's divided into a couple of different steps to provide some flexibility. Very often what happens is you'll have volunteers or some kind of seasonal staff who come in and do the initial review of the applications, kind of the deep dive processing of each application, and they'll be the ones who submit the applications. And you do that on a case-by-case basis. I review the application, I'm looking at it, and then I submit it. The approval step is divided into another further 2 steps, although you can, this is a tip for you, you can skip the middle step. So I'll explain. Once the application is submitted, again, sometimes by volunteers or people who aren't the kind of overall campaign administrator, the applications will be submitted. That's their initial pass. And then they need to be sometimes approved by either a supervisor or ultimately the admin of this campaign. And really what they're looking for is just a general overall understanding that that the applications are clean. Sometimes they'll do a whole nother full review. Some locations are really strict about making sure the applications get reviewed multiple times to make sure that you don't have somebody who's only approving certain types of applications and not others, and you want to be involved in that approval process. So if I want to do it that way, and I am a supervisor, there are permissions for intake supervisors. And if I am an intake supervisor, I'll have this button here that says supervisor approval, and you can see that the supervisor approval was added. Now, sometimes at the, especially at smaller kind of mid-size locations, you don't have two people who need to review it. You don't have a supervisor and an admin. You might just have the final admin. And so if I'm that same person, I can just go ahead and click admin approval as well. Now that's on a case-by-case basis. If I'm the supervisor or admin and I want to approve each application one by one, this is how I would do it. However, there is a handy trick you can use. If you look under applicants, it says application approval family. So this is a report page that helps you look at kind of at a glance at all of the applications you have coming up. So let me prepare this. Actually, we don't have any that are currently submitted. So I'm going to go ahead and submit a couple of these applications just so I can give us an idea of what this is going to look like. So give me just 1 second. So I'm just submitting applications so that we have a few that are in that status. Okay, that should be good. So now I'm going to go back to my application approval family. And what I can do is use this filter to find any that are in a status of submitted. So let's say I am the supervisor or the, oh, I thought there were two. Oh, well, I am the supervisor or the admin approver. What I can do is come here and filter for any that are submitted. And I can, in this one view, I can kind of just glance through and make sure, okay, that these angels, you know, reach the minimum age, they look legitimate, kind of, and I can check this box at the top. It will check any of them that are on this page. So I only have one, but if there are many, I can click to do a full supervisor approve on all of them at once, or I can just jump straight to the admin approval. So if you don't have that middle supervisor approval, this is probably the best way to do it. Let your intake staff submit all of the applications one by one, and then you can come here, filter for the ones that are submitted, check this box, and say, okay, let's approve them all at once. So you can do as many as you want all at one time. So that's a quick tip. That's something that we get asked every now and then. You know, it takes too long to approve all of these. What's a better way to do it? That's a good way to do that. Okay, so now that we have several applications that are at a status of admin approved. Admin approved is the point at which we say, okay, this family is completely official, their application is accepted and ready to move forward. And now that's where we take the angels and we start working with them individually. So up until now, we've been processing the family's application, and the family is going through all of these statuses: draft, pending, submitted, approved. And once they get to admin approved, that's where we start working with the angels. So I'm going to move over on my menu here under, instead of applicant records, we're looking for angel records now. So these are the angels from families that have made it at least to a status of admin approved. Okay, so any that were declined, the angels won't show here. Any that are still pending, the angels won't show here. Any that have been submitted but not approved, the angels won't show here. They'll only show here once they get to the status of admin approved. Okay. So now these are our official angels that we're working with. One of the things we want to go over today quickly, and I could talk forever about this next topic, but luckily there's a YouTube video already out there about it, but that's angel allocations. But I just want to give a couple of tips because this is something that I think some people have always been aware of, but maybe haven't used to its fullest extent. It is a really great tool, so I want to make sure that I give some tips that will help you be able to use that. So angel allocations is kind of our term for taking all of these angels and putting them in different buckets for adoption. So I might have my online bucket where I'm going to drop all these angels in that bucket for adoption online. And then I might have a bucket that is the North Park Mall. These are the angels that I'm going to hang on the tree at North Park Mall. So that's one of my buckets. And another bucket might be a corporate sponsor. So the Dallas Cowboys organization is going to adopt 1,000 of my angels. So I'll put 1,000 angels in that bucket. That's what we refer to as allocation. So allocating your angels is dropping them into those buckets. So this gives us a lot of tools to be able to manage that, with the overall goal being we know where all of our angels are at any given time. We're not accidentally giving the same tag to two different groups. We're not having two people adopt one angel while another angel sits there unadopted. This helps us manage that. So under angels, I'll go to angel allocations. And this is where I can see a list of any of my pre-existing buckets. So my pre-existing allocations are going to be the online allocation. So everybody gets an online allocation, even if you're not going to use it. And we'll talk about adoption. I think that's in our third webinar. So our next one in 2 weeks, we'll talk a lot about adoptions and how those can work. But today we're just focusing on getting the angels in the buckets. So everybody gets by default an online allocation. And then any site in your campaign setup, any site that you designated as an adoption site, so the place where you have a tree where people are going to come and actually do a physical adoption of an angel tag, those are already listed here. Now, whether you ever put angels in these or not, that doesn't matter. They're just kind of pre-populated for you. So these are our kind of pre-existing buckets, online and our adoption sites. We can create new buckets for sponsored allocations by clicking here, create a new sponsored allocation. And we're going to provide some information about this group that's adopting these angels. And really, this is just a tool to help you organize yourself. So we might say this is Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones himself is leading this project. So this is just a way where you can keep notes about who your contact is at each of these places. You can add their phone number. I don't think that's Jerry Jones' phone number, so I wouldn't call it if I were you. I just made that up. All right, so you get the idea. We can also track for it's really just, again, for your own internal purposes. How are they going to be returning their gifts to you? Are you going to pick them up? Are they going to drop them off? And if they're going to drop them off, which of your distribution sites will they be dropping them off at? Again, that list of distribution sites, it's built based on your campaign setup. And then you can say in here, okay, they're going to return their gifts by December 9th. And again, it's just a way for you to track your notes for all of these different sponsors and what your arrangement with each of them was. So more importantly, down here at the bottom is where I can say, okay, the Dallas Cowboys are wanting to adopt 100 family angels. And when we say family, we just mean these are the regular angels from families, right? So your normal family applications, these are the angels that came from there. If you're also using special care angels or forgotten angels, you can designate those as well. But let's just say they're going to adopt 100 angels, And the allocation deadline, again, is just a tool for you to say, okay, they're having an event on October 15th, and we have to have given them their angels by that date. And again, that just helps you track when you want to finish this allocation by. If I click down here at the bottom, this is an optional thing. I can say enforce additional filter criteria. So as it stands right now, the Dallas Cowboys are just getting 100 random family angels. However, if they say, actually, we only want to take males through, ages 13 to whatever, to 15. For whatever reason, that's a specific request that they have. They want to take angels in that range. Then you would be able to set those. If they don't care and it's just kind of a 50-50, or you just don't want to enforce any of these rules at all, you can just uncheck it. So if they have specific requests, and again, they're just requests, the system isn't going to force anything. It still is going to allow you to choose which angels go in there. But that's how you set that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now we see the Dallas Cowboys listed as a sponsored allocation. When we get to our next webinar, when we talk about adoptions, we'll talk a little bit more about how the angels that do get dropped into these buckets, how they can get adopted, and especially how your sponsors can use online adoption to facilitate the adoption of the angels you assign to them. We'll talk about all of that when we talk about adoption at our next webinar. But for today, I just wanted to show you about setting up your allocations, because if you may already have sponsors will be adopting angels, you can go ahead and enter them in there, even though you don't have any angels in your system yet. But there are a couple of different ways. There is a video about allocation, and it can get a little technical when you are allocating large numbers of angels, especially. That can get a little bit more complicated. So there are ways to do that where you can use this tool to basically, the system will use the rules that you've provided to find angels that are eligible for allocation to this particular group. So depending on a lot of different things, you can use this tool to do that. And that's a very good tool to use when you're allocating large numbers of angels, especially. However, another way to do that, and this is kind of the one I wanted to focus on because this is a tip that I'm not sure everybody's aware of. So another way to do angel allocations, and maybe even could be described as a little bit easier way to do it, is to use your angel records page. So this is our angel records list. I can use these filters to filter by lots of different criteria. I could say, I only want this certain age group, or I might say I only want family angels, or I only want a certain gender, or I only want ones from this particular intake site, or this particular distribution site. You can use all of these filters to get down to a list of angels, ultimately, right? To get down to a list of angels like this. And you can use the checkbox here. So I can check these, and really quickly, I can just click Update Allocation, and I can choose from the list of allocations or kind of buckets like we were talking about. So I can say, okay, I want to allocate these to Dallas Cowboys. I can go ahead and submit. You'll see there that the allocation allocated to has been updated. So now it says they're allocated to Dallas Cowboys. And the reason I wanted to do that first was because my biggest tip here is, if at all possible, it is a good practice to allocate your angels before you print them, before you print the tags. It can be very confusing when you start printing tags, if just printing them in bulk and then having to go through and find the right tags to separate and give out to people. And I've seen all kinds of really quite ingenious systems that people have come up with over the years, different baskets and different buckets and to move these physical tags. But what this gives you the ability to do is manage all of that beforehand. Separate all of your angels to where you want them to go, get them all allocated first, and then you can print them in batches by their allocation. So tip of the day, try to do your allocations first anywhere possible. It's going to make your life a lot easier. So because I have already allocated these angels, and imagine that I have thousands of angels at this point, right? Typically, I would have thousands of angels when I'm doing this. So now I can come and filter by allocation, and I could say, give me just the Dallas Cowboy kids. Okay, great. Now I want to print them. And so from here, I already have a list of who these kids should be. You can export this to Excel. Sometimes it's a good idea to have that kind of physical, print that on a piece of paper. And then once all your tags are printed off, you can kind of bundle them together. And so now you have a list of the angels and the tag numbers that should be in this batch that you just printed. Sometimes that's really helpful as well. So in order to print tags, I'm going to leave here for just a second, because this is something I said on our last webinar that I would talk about on this one. And I am going to go back over to our campaign admin. So this is where we were at our last webinar. Hopefully you've all been through and configured your campaign and done all those fun things. There is one piece here related to the printing of tags, and that is the selection of your angel tag template. So I'm going to click here to edit this campaign just to show you. There are a few different types of campaigns, and you'll see some here that you won't necessarily see on your screen because it will depend on what location you're from. And of course, I'm an admin, so I can see all of them. But there are several different types. So the standard, I'll start with the standard template. If you click show sample, it'll actually give you an example of what a completed tag print will look like. So what you can see is this tag is going to print 3 tags per page. This one is legal size. So it's going to print 3 tags per page. And then you notice that white space at the top. That white space is where the angel is pre-printed on this tag. So these are the most typical, the most common tags. You can get them at all the trade departments. And what you're really looking for, it doesn't matter what that graphic at the top is. People have different opinions about that graphic and what it should look like. It doesn't matter what that looks like. What you're looking for is the angel tree cardstock that is legal size, that has 3 tags per page, and it has that kind of pre-perforated lines. So you can get those at all of your trade departments. There's a link in, I believe, in our FAQs. If you search up tags, there are some links to the different trade departments and the different tag stock that you can buy. But this is something to be thinking about now. It's only August, but this is something to be thinking about now. Make sure you've ordered your tag stock and you have it in hand, and you have that ready to go. There are a few different, every now and then somebody will come to us and say we have a different size tag. Sometimes we're able to accommodate those, sometimes not. But if you do have something that is a special request, you can write to us at our support address, and we'll let you know if that's something we can do or not. But I'll give you some other tips on how to handle that if not. So what you can do is you can actually look at these samples, and you can print these onto your cardstock to just see what it will look like. To give you an example, and maybe you don't want it like that, but instead you want, let's see, some of these are different because like instead of being side by side, these have the labels on top and the bottom, and then have some of the information repeated on the bottom. Some of these tags have another perforation at the bottom that you can tear off. So you just want to look through some of these just to see what they look like, and you can print some samples onto your cardstock to see how it will look. Okay, so that's choosing the template. That's step number 1. You need to make sure that you've chosen a template and that you're going to have the cardstock to be able to handle that. There's one other option here that says print angel first name on tags, yes or no. If you want the names on the tag, you would say yes. If you do not want them on the tag, you'd say no, and it just won't print the angel first names. It'll never print last names, but the option to print the name or not is there. Some locations like that there, some don't, so we gave the option for you to choose that. So now that you have your template set, now we can actually print some tags. So I've got my template set. I've got my cardstock in hand that you bought from trade, that you bought from wherever, that has the pre-printed angel on it. You have that in hand, and now you're ready to print some tags. So I filtered by my allocation, and then I check the box. I can check the box at the top to select all of them, or if I, for whatever reason, I'm just printing one, I could just check one angel, but basically I'm checking the angels that I want to print. So I'm going to go ahead and grab them all, and I'm going to say print angel tags. This is telling me this is going to print 2 angel tags on this template because this is the one that I had selected. And then there's an option to include barcodes or not. At our next webinar, I believe, either the next one or the one after that, we will cover barcodes more in depth. So we'll talk about how to use these barcodes. But this is where you choose whether you want to include them on the printing of the tag or not. So I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say print tags. So what this is going to do, and you do have to be, this happened really quickly for me because there were only 2 angels, but you do have to be a little bit patient, especially if you're printing large numbers of angels. While I'm at it, a tip would be to not try to print more than 100 or 200 angels at a time. It can go really, really slow. There's a lot of processing happening behind the scenes. So you want to make sure to do it in a little bit smaller batches. But what it will do is create this PDF document. So it grabs all of the information from all over the place, depending on your campaign and depending on what, let me zoom in here a little bit, depending on what data was provided for each of your angels, that will get printed onto the tag. So our settings said don't print the angel name, so that's missing. Angel name is missing because we said no, do not print first name, but it does have the angel's code, their gender and age, and then whatever information they filled out on their application based on your settings, okay? So all of that information is there. The barcode is just underneath, and again, we'll talk later about how we use those barcodes. But the idea is now that I have a PDF document, I can save this document. A good practice is to say, you know, this is I could name this file Dallas Cowboys, you know, numbers 1 through 50 kind of thing. And this is my batch of Dallas Cowboys number 1 through 50. I can print this from the PDF print screen, right? So I'm just going to say print, and I'll put my cardstock into my printer and I'll print it from there. Okay, so we get some questions every now and then about people having printer trouble, and we can help as much as we can, but ultimately this is between Adobe and the printer at this point to make sure that it all gets printed the correct size. The template itself is set to be legal size. So if for some reason you were in here and you had it set to print portrait, or you had it, you know, set at a different scale, it would mess up your printing, right? So you need to make sure that it has the right paper size selected for what your tag size is. And then every now and then people will also have trouble with the margins of their printer. Some really old printers have kind of wide margins. So you might have to play around with it a little bit and shrink it the tiniest bit. But for the most part, you should be able to figure out how to print from Adobe to your printer to print this PDF document. But once the document is created from the website, then it's kind of on you and your printer to figure out how to get it to come out correctly. But they are all laid out in such a way that they should print no problem onto your cardstock that you have. Okay, so that is kind of a little quick but rushed but version of how to print tags. There can be a little bit more to it, but those are kind of the tips that I wanted to make sure to point out. Number 1, allocate first everywhere you can. It's just going to help you. Number 2, to make sure you have your cardstock in hand well in advance. And number 3, when you get to the printing stage, to make sure that you have your print settings correct in Adobe or wherever you're printing that PDF from, to make sure it comes out correctly on your printer. You will notice that, let me refresh this actually. gonna refresh this page. And one helpful thing is you'll notice that these two angels now have a last printed date, just here, a last printed date of now. So that's just to help you if you really mess up and forget where you left off and which ones you have and haven't printed, that can be helpful. So just know if you print it again, it will get updated to the last time it was printed. So that can be a little helpful tip as well. Okay, so we only have a few more minutes, but I do have one really exciting new feature that I want to share with you. This should be, this is something that returning users you'll be extra excited about, and for those new users, you're just inheriting all of the knowledge that we learned from the previous users. So I know you'll like it as well. So if you do have a couple more minutes to stick around, let me go over this last thing. So one thing that happens is you start getting all of these applications, and this is especially true if you're doing online applications where you don't have that face-to-face touch point with the applicants, and sometimes it's not as easy to kind of get information distributed out to them. The system sends out lots of different types of system notifications, right? So just like we saw when I submitted my application, I received an email that said, hey, thanks for starting your application. Here's how you can get back to it. Similarly, when my application is approved, I receive an email that says, oh, your application's approved. Here's when your distribution appointment will be, and so on and so on. So the system is notifying people, reminding them of appointments, that kind of thing. It's doing a lot of that behind the scenes, which is fantastic. It takes a lot of that extra step of communication out. You don't have to deal with that. But every now and then, you will also have a need to send out a communication that is outside of those normal system applications. One great example would be it's distribution day tomorrow, and there's a weather event, and we're not going to be able to do it. We're going to have to reschedule everyone, and you need to get word out to them really, really quickly. This is the type of thing that you'll be able to use this for. So this new feature allows you to send out mass communications to your applicants. So under admin, and this is only accessible for people who have the highest level admin permission. So not just any of your intake supervisors can be sending out emails on your behalf. Only you as admins would be able to do that. So here under the admin screen, I'm going to click on Send Communications. And this is going to walk me through a process for generating mass communications out to my users or to my applicants. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. It's going to take me through a 3-step process. The first one is to use these filters to identify the people I'm wanting to send this to. So in the example that I just gave, where we say there's a weather event, so we need to move this one particular distribution day. Well, you don't need that notification to go out to everybody. You only need that to go out to the people who are having distribution at that location. Let's say it's the Christmas warehouse on that certain day. So this weather event's happening tomorrow, which happens to be December 10th. So what I'm saying here is find me any applicants who have a distribution site of the Dallas Salvation Army Christmas distribution and who have a distribution appointment on this day only. So what the system will do is go and find those people who fit those criteria for us to send our notification to. So in that example, there may also be other, I'm sure you guys can come up with all kinds of examples where you might need to use this. But the idea is that this filter, it helps us narrow down to the applicants we're looking for, not just everybody. All right, so I'm going to use this filter to say I only want to send this notification to people who came through this intake site. And I'm going to click Next, and that's going to tell me, okay, these are the people who fit that criteria. In this case, we only have 5. You'll probably have hundreds. So I can glance through those and just know that if we are trying to send messages via email, it obviously requires that they have an email. All of your online applicants will have one because we enforce that. So they will all have one. However, if you entered them manually, kind of in an interview style, of course, if we don't have their email address, we can't send them an email. So this is a great reason why you probably want to make that a required field, even on your applicant input. If you're planning on using this, you want to make sure you have email addresses for people. The phone numbers as well. If we have a phone number, we'll try to send it. If it doesn't go through, there's not really anything we can do about it. Or if they don't have one, obviously we can't send a text message. But anyway, so this is giving me a list of all the people we're trying to send this to. For whatever reason, if you need to kind of massage this list a little bit and not send to this person and not send to this person, you can do that. You can kind of check and uncheck who that's going to go to. I'm just going to leave the ones that have my email address just so we can see how that works. And then if I scroll down here to the bottom, it also gives me a place to send this to additional recipients. Depending on what the nature of your communication is, maybe in that first example where it's a distribution day event, not only do you want to send that to the applicants, but you might want to send that to a list of your employees or your volunteers or whoever else was supposed to be there to help for distribution that day. So you can type in any email addresses. You can type in as many as you need to. You just type it in and click enter or tab, and you can type in as many of those or copy and paste in as many of those as you need to. So those are kind of additional recipients on top of the ones who are already receiving it because they are applicants that fit your criteria. All right, so once I've determined the list of people I want to send it to, now I just need to compose my message and determine how I want to send it. So we have two options here, either by text or email. You could also do both. So I'll go ahead and click email first. And here it wants me to provide a reply to email address. So what that means is when we send this notification on your behalf and an applicant tries to respond to it, if it just comes back to the system, it's not going to be read. We're not, nobody's reading that. Nobody's going to know what to do with it. So instead, what you want to do here is give an address where you will be able to monitor the replies that come back. So you might want to set up a separate mailbox. Maybe you set up like angeltree@mycore.com kind of thing, or at uss.salvationarmy.org kind of thing. But the idea is that whatever email address you put in here, that's where return or replies will be sent to. Okay. So it might be like something like that, mycore. And then of course it's just an email. So your subject is something like that, and then you'll say, dear applicants, oops. Something like that, and you can give addresses. You can put anything you want in this email. This email is kind of rich text, so you can play around with the formatting of it and get it looking how you want to. If you want to send out a test before you send it out to your full audience, just to know what that's going to look like, you can click send test email. You can provide an email address. Say send test, and that will send a test notification to whomever you listed there, just so that you guys can maybe pass it around the office, make sure everybody spell checked everybody and we're all good to go. So that notification, that test notification gets sent out, and here it is. So you can get an idea of what that's going to look like. So it still has the Angel Tree header, so your users will know that that came from Angel Tree. And then there's the message that we provided. It says test in the subject just because this is a test. Obviously, when we send the real one, it wouldn't say test anymore. Okay, so that's email. So that's how you compose your email. If you want to send it by text message instead or in addition to the email, you can check that text message box. You can provide a message. Now we are limited in the number of characters you can send in a text message. If we start to go over that, if we start to split them up, if you start putting things like links, URLs, or phone numbers, your text messages can get flagged as kind of spam from the carriers. So the mobile carriers will just start rejecting the messages. So you want to be careful to limit them to 160 characters and not include things like links and phone numbers and things that could get it flagged as spammy. So we might say something like, now remember, especially when it's coming through a text message, when it's an email, you get the header that says this is from Angeltree. When it's coming as a text message, they don't know who it's from. It's just a random number. So you'll want to say, something that identifies yourself as Angeltree, and that's why they're receiving this. So that's just a tip that I just thought of right now. And you might even say something like that. Okay, so we're sending the email that has all of the long description, and then maybe sending a text message just says, hey, go look at your email. This is important. One thing to note is that while emails are cheap and easy to send, so at least as of right now, we're not adding on any additional cost for sending out those mass emails. That's just an added feature that you are welcome to use with your normal pricing that you're already paying for the software. So that's fantastic. You don't have to worry about how many of those you send. But text messages are a little different. Carrier rates are changing all the time, and it's a little bit more expensive to do that. So we will pass through the cost for any text messages that you send, and that's what this pricing agreement is talking about here. So your first 100 text messages for this campaign are free. So every year you kind of get the first 100 free. However, after that, then we'll just pass through the normal carrier rates, which these can change at any time, technically, but for now they are set at that's 1.9 cents. So another way to look at it is you get 100 text messages for $1.99. So if you can do the math if you want to go ahead and if it's an important enough message to get out to your applicants right away via text message, those are the rates that are going to apply. You'll just have to multiply that out by how many you're thinking of sending. So if you're okay with that, and if you agree with that, you'll check this box here. And that will get billed at the end of the season when we do the normal billing for Angeltree. It'll just get added on for any text messages that were sent, and we'll have a log of how many were sent on what date and which of your users sent them, just so you'll have that to compare to. But that will just get passed through on the normal invoice at the end of the season. So you can also send text messages. So you could just type in a phone number here and send a test of that as well, just to make sure that, again, your grammar is all good and everybody's happy with it and you know what it's going to look like. So once you are happy with your composed messages, here we're doing email and text. You could just do one or the other, but here we're going to do both. So I'm going to click next. And the last step is just to confirm everything. So this is what my reply to address is going to be. This is the subject. This is the body. And of course, I've already done a test email, so I know exactly what this is going to look like, and I'm happy with it. It's going to deliver to 2 recipients. If you remember, we had 5 possible recipients, and then I unchecked 3 of them, leaving 2. So there are 2, and then I added an additional recipient at the bottom where we can type in just extra people. So this is going to be delivered to 2 people plus 1 additional, and then the text message is going to be delivered to those 2 phone numbers that we have. And if I'm happy with everything, I'm going to go ahead and click Send Communication. It is important to note that it will take a little bit of time for it to spool through and send all of these out. So don't panic if they don't arrive immediately. The emails tend to come a little bit quicker than the text messages. So just give it a couple minutes before you think about resending it. There shouldn't be any reason why you would need to resend it. But just in case, you can stay on this page and wait until you've confirmed that they went out. And then when you're done, you can just click close. So I received those emails, I received the text message, and the idea is that you can send those at any time for any reason with any message out to your applicants, just keeping in mind that there is a small fee when it comes to the text messages after your first 100. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And that actually brings us to the end of what we wanted to cover today. So thanks for joining, and we will see you all hopefully in 2 weeks. Thanks.